In Cuba, where oil from Venezuela has dried up under US pressure, electricity, fuel and medicine is running short.
Not only electricity, fuel and medicine is running short in Cuba, but doctors and health workers are running short in Jamaica because of the United States pressure. Because of this pressure, from Jamaica to Ghana, let's dive in. So we've seen the blockade and the pressure the United States is exerting on Cuba, and that caused blackout. We've seen their massive ship Nimitz, one of the biggest and largest ships and the oldest in the United States fleet. Very powerful indeed. We've also seen that ship docked in Jamaica, and Jamaica welcomed it, and they spent about 5 days in Jamaica, and whatever discussion they had, well, it is not so much in the public domain. But the United States had exerted pressure on Jamaica long before Nimitz docked in Jamaica, and that pressure led it to Ghana. The pressure from the United States changed everything. Not only does the United States see Jamaica as a friendly partner, it also exerts its pressure on Jamaica healthcare system. So Jamaica could be dragged into a war. Yeah man, they can drag Jamaica into a war against Cuba, to which Jamaica would not want, because Jamaica is strategically placed. And we've seen Nimitz visited Jamaica. We've seen pressures on Jamaica healthcare system led Jamaica to turn to Ghana, and now we're seeing a lot of activities happening behind the scenes, to which the world is not happy with the pressure the United States is placed on Cuba. Little over a year ago, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, visited Jamaica, and he had this to say.
The first thing is to separate the medical from the labor issues that we are pointing to. Okay, this is not about doctors. Okay, this is not about the provision of medical assistance. We have no problem with medical assistance. We have no problem with doctors. We have a problem, and I'm not speaking about Jamaica. We've discussed this today about, following international labor standards and the like, but I'm just talking about this program in general, how it's operated around the world. And how it's operated around the world is that basically the doctors are not paid. In many other parts of the world, the doctors are not paid. You pay the Cuban government. The Cuban government decides how much of anything to give them. They take away their passports. They basically operate as forced labor in many places.
So Marco Rubio, if you're not talking about Jamaica, how comes you pressured Jamaica or forced the Jamaican government to immediately launch an unprecedented review of its long decade-old agreement between the Cuban governments? The threat that you posed was in relation to visa restrictions or visa ban that was done around August 2025, and this ban was threatened to high-ranking regional international health officials who refused to sever ties with the Cuban medical brigade, that they no longer want their service. And that agreement that you said Jamaica is doing a good job and you're not talking about Jamaica, was ended on the 4th of March 2026. The Jamaica Minister of Foreign Affairs delivered a unilateral notice terminating health cooperation programs, prompting Cuba to issue a public statement regretting that Jamaica had yielded to the pressure. So how comes your double standard is saying that you're not talking about Jamaica, but yet still Jamaica had to yield to the pressure and gave up its long-standing agreement between itself and Cuba in relation to healthcare?
And so I think we can all agree that the trafficking in labor, be they doctors or farm workers, is not something that we would want to be supportive of, and we find that to be an egregious practice on the part of the Cuban regime. Now, every country operates their program differently, and obviously because of our relationship with Jamaica, we're going to engage with them on that and talk about it further and have a better understanding. Perhaps none of this applies in the way it's handled here.
It certainly doesn't apply the way it's handled in Jamaica, because Prime Minister Andrew Holness pushed back very firmly, and I respected what he said in front of Marco Rubio, saying that none of what you're saying applies in Jamaica, and rightly so, he should push back.
In terms of Cuban doctors in Jamaica, let us be clear. The Cuban doctors in Jamaica have been incredibly helpful to us. Jamaica has a deficit in health personnel, primarily because many of our health personnel have migrated to other countries. We are, however, very careful not to exploit the Cuban doctors who are here. We ensure that they are treated within our labor laws and benefit like any other worker. So any characterization of the program by others certainly would not be applicable to Jamaica.
But one of the firmest leaders in the Caribbean, a tough individual, pushed back really hard against the notion of exploitation. But before we get to that person, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, because this is one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. Now this person is none other than, they call her the Iron Lady, Mia Motley. She was furious. This is what she had to say.
I will be the first to go to the line and to tell you that we could not get through the pandemic without the Cuban nurses and the Cuban doctors. I will also be the first to tell you that we paid them the same thing that we pay Bajans, and that the notion, as was peddled not just by this government in the US, but the previous government, that we were involved in human trafficking by engaging with the Cuban nurses, was fully repudiated and rejected by us. Now, I don't believe that we have to shout across the seas, but I am prepared, like others in this region, that if we cannot reach a sensible agreement on this matter, then if the cost of it is the loss of my visa to the US, then so be it. What the Cubans have been able to do for us, far from approximating itself to human trafficking, has been to save lives and limbs and sight for many a Caribbean person.
But here is a Caribbean leader that is very serious, and she is not willing to bow under any pressure. But then why Jamaica turned to Ghana after US pressure? I'll explain to you in a minute or so exactly why this is. But before we get there, it is important to look at the visit that the health minister, Dr. Christopher Tufton, who visited Ghana, and what he had to say about the agreement and the exchanges. Watch this.
All right, so this is a very happy moment for us here in Ghana. Myself, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade, Camila Johnson-Smith. We just signed an MOU with Ghana around the recruitment and deployment of healthcare workers from Ghana into Jamaica to fill the gaps that we have that we cannot fill through local Jamaicans being employed. It's very historic. You may recall that I announced in my sectorial that we had signed MOUs with Philippines, India, Nigeria, and Ghana. The technical details of those have been worked out, which is why I'm here. And there's a lot of excitement around the collaboration. Ghana and Jamaica are quite close, actually. The historical background is significant. The natural affinity to cooperate, English-speaking, Commonwealth, similar type of training for healthcare workers represents significant potential.
From Cuba to Ghana, because of the threats and pressure the United States was putting on the Caribbean leaders, threatening them to remove their visas, and therefore they had no choice but have to turn to Ghana. But the question is, why did Jamaica turn to Ghana? Well, we need more nurses and more doctors, more healthcare workers, to which Jamaica is at a shortfall. And what is the reason for that? Well, many of our trained nurses and doctors gone overseas, particularly mostly to the United States itself, to work because the salary over there is a little bit more attractive. So Jamaica, you need to do some work for yourself. You need to improve the pay for health workers to attract those Jamaicans already left the country to return home and work in the health sector, to which we have to import workers from overseas. I'm glad they've chosen Ghana. Of course, they've made some connection with other countries, but Ghana and Jamaica has deep-rooted ties. How is your tree? It's saying, Enyamamoto saying, is just saying, how are you, and how is things going now, and so on, if you understand the language. Nevertheless, Ghanaians are our sisters and brothers, and I'm glad that Jamaica is collaborating with them, and they are making up the shortfalls for our healthcare workers. This is as a result of the United States pressure for us to relieve our closest neighbor, Cuba, and look elsewhere in order to fill this gap. But Jamaica is not the only country using nurses from Ghana. Plenty of Caribbean countries also imported nurses and health workers into their countries. America is doing a lot of bad things in the Caribbean, and Caribbean leaders is frustrated and they've had enough. And we need to stand up collectively and show the United States that we're not going to bow under pressure. But now it's over to you. Sound off in the comment section and let's have a discussion and a debate. Do you think Jamaica should have bowed under pressure and sent home the Cuban health workers, doctors and nurses because the United States threatened visa removal and visa restrictions? Or do you think that Jamaica should have stood their ground and willing to give up their visas for the United States in order to prove a point and show that they will not be bound under pressure and the United States will not rule them, just like the Iron Lady Motley, how much she stood up and show some grit, show some courage and show some leadership? Sound off in the comment section. Let's have a discussion and a debate about this. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I shall see you on the other topic.